time in 2 days, attempted assassinations have Israel pointing the finger at Iran. In Bangkok, an explosion blowing the legs off an Iranian man carrying grenades. He and another suspect at the house he was staying in are in custody. On Monday, separate blasts targeting the Israeli embassies in Tbilisi and New Delhi. Could they be revenge attacks for the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists? The brewing standoff over Iran's nuclear program also felt this Tuesday in the Strait of Hormuz, with a U.S. warship once again defying Tehran's threat against crossing into that key passage for the world's oil supply. So what is the end game? Will Washington back Israel all the way, even if it means airstrikes on suspected nuclear installations? Timelines compete in this story. There's the race to build a bomb, the next U.S. elections, and Iran with elections of its own. Next month, the vote for a new parliament scheduled against the backdrop of a low simmer of dissent. Today in the France 24 debate, we look at the push to bomb Iran, and talking about it with us is Israel's Deputy Chief of Mission here in Paris, Sami Ravel. Thank you for being with us. Nushabeh Amiri of Iranian Ruse Online news website, joining us from Washington. Reza Marashi of the National Iranian American Council. Thank you for being with us. And
thank you for having me.
And Stephen Ekovich of the American University of Paris, the France 24 debate, where you can always weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. You can catch us at François F24. Israel squarely pointing the finger at Iran after those two attacks we mentioned, attacks that have angered as well, by the way, the local authorities in Thailand, Georgia, and India.
We condemn this incident. At the moment, I'm not pointing a finger at any particular group or any particular organization, but whoever did it, we condemn it in the strongest terms.
And as for the Israeli defense minister, he says the Bangkok blast proves once again that Iran and its proxies continue to perpetrate terror, while on Monday, the foreign minister hinted at revenge.
We know how to identify exactly who is responsible and who is carrying out these attacks. And while we are trying to remain diplomatic, we will not ignore it.
Trying to remain diplomatic. What does he mean, Sami Ravel?
Well, as you've mentioned, there have been failed terrorist attacks both in Azerbaijan and in Thailand. And yesterday, two more terrorist attacks, one in Tbilisi and the second one in New Delhi, in which a few people were injured, including local employee and women working for the Israeli embassy. These are things that Israel can't accept, and I think the world community cannot accept. Iran is supporting terrorism. It is supporting the Hezbollah. The Hezbollah and Iran have been orchestrating terrorist attacks throughout the world, and this is something which cannot be accepted, neither by Israel nor by the international community.
But what is the Iranian foreign minister hinting at? What is the next step? What is the retaliation for this?
The next step is for the world community, all countries which have said clearly, and actually in recent days, these attempts and the recent attack also in New Delhi, terrorist attack, were condemned clearly by the United States, by Catherine Ashton representing the EU, by the French Foreign Ministry, by the British Foreign Ministry. These attacks were condemned clearly. And it is our expectation that Israel, together with its allies in the world, will do everything possible to prevent any further terrorist attacks against diplomats or against civilians around the world.
Is the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists also terrorist attacks?
Iran nuclear program is a red line, and this is something which is not a concern only to Israel. Of course, Israel cannot ignore the fact that Iranian leaders, including Khamenei in recent days, call for to erase Israel from the map of the world. We cannot ignore these calling. Israel never threatened Iran. You will not find one occasion where Israel threatened Iran in any circumstances. Iran is threatening to erase Israel from the map of the world. We cannot ignore this, and we cannot ignore the fact that they are continuing these very days their nuclear program, which the IAEA says clearly has military intentions. These two phenomena are something which are to be a concern not only to Israel, but again, to the Arab world in its all, to the Gulf countries, to Europe, to the United States. And that's why the whole world is doing everything possible to stop this program.
Reza Marashi, what do you see as being the next step now?
Well, I think first and foremost, these terrorist attacks should be condemned in no uncertain terms. It doesn't matter who's perpetrating terrorism. The fact of the matter is, it is indeed terrorism, but it's no less important to unpack what we do know from what we don't. And while we do know that terrorist attacks have taken place on back-to-back days in multiple countries across the world, we don't, in fact, have confirmation who has perpetrated these terrorist acts. My own government, the American government, has been conspicuously silent on who, in fact, has perpetrated this. And I think that's because a bit more due diligence needs to be carried out to see what, in fact, has happened and who, in fact, is behind it. And it could very well be the Iranian government. The Indian government came out and said, or was it the Indian press came out and said that they had other suspects, didn't necessarily think it was Iran. So we need to look into this a bit more to find out what's actually going on to make sure that we can nip it in the bud and prevent it from happening again. And you know, that being said, moving forward, I think this is part and parcel of a much larger geopolitical problem that exists between Israel and Iran. We have gotten into this chicken and the egg argument of what came first and who's threatening who. I think the more important question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we stop it? Because with no communication, it increases the likelihood of misperceptions, miscalculations, and a downward spiral towards a conflict that I think both sides would independently seek to avoid, and that I know the U.S. government, my former colleagues, seek to avoid.
And just to hear from the other side, at a rally last Saturday to mark the 33rd anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, Iran's president addressed crowds in Tehran's Freedom Square. Here's what he had to say.
God willing, in the coming days, the world will see Iran showcasing some very big nuclear achievements.
Very big achievements. Nushabeh Amiri, what is he talking about?
Nonsense. Just talking. And it's really... whenever he opens his mouth, I really have lots of fear, because he talks about the thing that really, I don't know if it exists or not, but what he says puts my country in danger. I'd like to say something to you that, first of all, I don't like to say that Iran supports terrorism. You can talk about the Islamic Republic, because Iran, we don't like terrorism.
I agree with you.
So we should do it. Say that. Secondly, I think that we should be very clear. We don't approve terrorism or killing people like that, neither in Israel nor in Iran. So when you talk about the red line, it means that if we kill the scientists in Iran, it's okay. I guess, as Mr. Marashi said, we should stop all this sort of action and start talking and negotiating, because if it goes like that, it means that we are in one of the very important and crucial and dangerous period of our history, not for Iran, for the world, because we are going towards a sort of clash, which I don't think would be helpful for the people. But what Mr. Ahmadinejad says is just nonsense, because...
I just want to react on the last point, because you know, it's not Israel facing Iran. Iran has violated 3 United Nations Security Council's resolutions, voted by the United States, voted by France, voted by other major members of the United Nations Security Council. So here you have a country which is violating the Security Council's resolutions, and actually sanctions have been applied on the Islamic Republic of Iran because of these violations. And it is, as I said, not only a danger to Israel, it is a danger to the Arab world, to the Middle East in general, and it is a danger even to Europe, because the Iranians are developing even missiles.
All the time they show the Palestinian people on TV, and they say that they don't have their home, and so on. You know, if he had a peace in this area, then Mr. Ahmadinejad, or people like Ahmadinejad, could not be able to speak about a thing like that.
Let me ask Stephen Ekovich, do you think it's spiraling out of control when you see the rhetoric rising?
I think it's nice to hope that by talking, this can be diffused and that we can avoid hostilities. But I'm not sure that leaders of the Islamic Republic want to negotiate or want to have some sort of peaceful settlement. If they want to talk, they've shown, at least in the recent past, they want to talk just to stretch out talks to give themselves time to eventually build a nuclear weapon. I think there's pretty wide consensus on that. There is always a danger, of course. If you're going to make a threat, you have to make that threat credible. Making the threat credible means you have to be prepared to use military force in a situation of high tension that could lead to a miscalculation and to hostilities. But in any case, in order to give your diplomacy some punch, as it were, you do have to make a credible threat sometimes. You cannot take all of the options off the table. Some of the options have to remain on the table, and the White House has said all options remain on the table. The Israelis say all options remain on the table. We don't know if that really means they're going to actually use any military force, but nevertheless, in order to have a persuasive, a forceful diplomacy, you have to be ready to use force.
All right, Newsweek reports that the head of Israeli intelligence was in Washington some 2 weeks ago. Tamir Pardo evaluating how the United States would react if Israel decided to attack Iran's nuclear facilities on its own. It's part of a broader piece in Newsweek entitled Obama's Dangerous Game with Iran. In it, you have the sentence, a senior U.S. intelligence official says both sides performed a kind of kabuki dance on the assassinations and industrial accidents that have increased in Iran during the past year. Quote, the Israelis don't want to say, and we don't want to know. Reza Marashi, do you agree with that assessment?
I think it's in part true. It's not necessarily that the Israelis don't want to say and that the Obama administration doesn't want to know. I think the Israelis certainly don't want to say, but the Obama administration has come out and said two specific instances over the past month that demonstrate the Israeli government supporting organizations that are currently designated as terrorist organizations by the United States, Jundullah and the Mujahideen al-Khalq, the latter of which is widely despised by Iranians inside of Iran. And you know, these kinds of things don't get leaked by the U.S. government, particularly the Obama administration, who's very hard on leaks, unless they're trying to send a message. And that message isn't that there is disagreement between the Israeli government and the U.S. government. In fact, Obama has been a greater friend to Israel, arguably, than any of the more recent presidents. I think the real message is, you know, we need to be in lockstep with one another. There has to be continued dialogue and communication with one another, and there has to be rules to the game here. You know, there can't be support for terrorist organizations by the Israeli government on the one hand that really do fit the U.S. government definition of terrorism, and then on the other hand, you know, be very critical when we see these other kinds of terrorist acts taking place, whether it's the Iranian government doing it or not. I mean, the Iranian government is a state sponsor of terror, according to the U.S. government, so it's almost a moot point. But again, you know, these kinds of double standards don't do well in trying to diffuse the crisis. And there is one other point that I wanted to make to my friend at the American University of Paris. He makes a very good point, but it's important not to extrapolate. The U.S. government has a consensus intelligence estimate that says the Iranian government has not yet chose to pursue nuclear weapons. And that's an important differentiation between a drive towards the nuclear weapon. And being able to operationalize that means investing in a diplomatic process that's no doubt difficult, but diplomacy isn't supposed to only take place with your friends. In fact, all of the most difficult diplomatic dances, whether you're looking at Northern Ireland, for example, it took over 700 days of the parties not even showing up to the room. And then on the 701st day, they reach an agreement. Repairing relations with Vietnam took literally years. So the expectation that diplomacy can be successful in a day or a couple of weeks or maybe even a month or two, I think is really far-fetched. And we need to invest in the process without being appeasing or weakening America's you know, defense, things of that nature. I think it's possible to walk and chew gum at the same time.
But there's something disturbing in what you just said, Reza, which is that between the United States and Israel, there's a bit of information being withheld.
Well, yeah, I think in that Newsweek report, there was two things that were being said. One, the Israeli government isn't sharing all of its intelligence with the United States anymore, and I do think that's a cause for concern. And two, I think that the United States government probably says, okay, well, if that's going to happen, then we're going to do that on our end as well. So I think an improvement in communications between the two governments can certainly take place. There's no doubt about that. I think you could say the same about the United States and any of its allies, whether it be the United Kingdom, France, or anywhere else. And I think this dialogue will continue. Prime Minister Netanyahu will be in Washington for the AIPAC conference in the next couple of weeks. There'll certainly be meetings at the highest levels between the Israeli government and the U.S. government, and it'll be another opportunity to take a step to try to get on the same page and, again, avoid a conflict that I think both sides, all parties really, would independently seek to avoid.
I think we have to be wary of all intelligence estimates because even the people who do intelligence can't be absolutely sure of this. It's not a perfect art. And even the United States has changed its evaluation of the level of the threat coming from Iran. It's also true that the Israelis and the Americans don't share the same judgment about the extent of the threat, nor about the urgency of the threat. For the Israelis, whose survival and well-being and security is at stake, this threat is larger than it is for the United States. It's more urgent than it is for the United States, and we can understand that. So I think when we get into intelligence, we have to be very, very, very wary, and we can understand why the intelligence apparatus of both Israel and the United States may have different appreciations. Now, the United States and Israel have shared intelligence over the years, but they've also withheld intelligence, and that's natural. States don't share all of the information with other states. In fact, the United States and Israel are very good friends and allies, but that has not prevented the two countries from even spying on each other when they've thought it necessary. I think nobody here is saying that this could be solved overnight. Of course, we're all hoping that in the long run, our lives aren't in danger, and that we can come to some sort of solution. But we're not in the long term yet. We're in the immediate term, and the immediate term is a very dangerous situation.
But personally, I think that there can't be any sort of negotiation with the Islamic Republic because they need enemy. They don't want to negotiate. In fact, it's so many years that they start, and each time they postpone and they say another thing. In fact, they're killing the time. This is the problem. What I'm very much concerned about is my country, the people, because this government, they need to have an enemy. It's like Stalin and like Hitler. They need to have enemy always, and with this enemy, they can suppress the people. So if there's now there's Israel and there's USA and there's other country, what I expect is to make this government to do real negotiation, not just killing the time and putting the people in danger.
Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. Just to say that, I mean, this is again. There is a coordination with all the big powers in the world around us, including actually Russia and China, which is very, very important. You're not talking here about a threat to Israel or only to the United States. It's a worldwide, it's a global threat. And there is no doubt today that there is a plan. I mean, you talked about coordination. There is very close coordination between the major powers on this, and also, of course, with Israel as well. We have very close coordination with all world powers on this issue because, as you said, it's an existential problem. And there is also a plan, there is a proposal made to the Iranians. Very clear red lines on enrichment of uranium have been made to them. And now what has to be done is to exercise. And this is, I think, the line which is...
I'm going to cut you off.
No, just to finish the sentence. Exercise even tougher sanctions in order to convince the Iranian regime that it has no other choice but to go back and negotiate.
We'll be discussing the effectiveness of sanctions when we come back. You're watching the France 24 today.